We've
Yeah,
got
we have
11 now.
11. If we want to go ahead and get started, at least on the introductions, we have almost everyone back.
Yeah. Okay. So the idea for introductions is just name and your organization. So let's go to Eric.
Which Eric?
You, Eric.
Oh, okay, sorry. There's many. Sorry. Okay, I'm Eric Yan with HS Link Open Source Human Services Server.
Okay.
And I'm
Adam.
Well, I'm Adam Hertman. I'm with Stewards of Change.
Dee Dee.
Good morning. I'm Dee Dee Yazzie Divine with Native American Connections in Phoenix, Arizona.
Kaylee.
Hi, good morning. I'm Kaylee Lissa, and I'm actually just a graduate student, third year PhD student at UC Santa Cruz.
Nobody's just anything. Lisa.
Hi, Lisa Sloan with the Technical Assistance Collaborative out of Boston.
Sarah.
Sarah DeSilvi, a couple hats, a rural family nurse practitioner and clinical informaticist at the Gravity Project.
Let's see who we have left. BD.
Hi, I'm Brian, or BD Hanspicker, CTO of Open City Labs, and along with Eric Yan, one of the technical leads on Project Unify at the National Interoperability Collaborative.
All right. Is there anyone that I missed?
I'm currently sending the link to Diane. She didn't get it, so she'll be joining us shortly.
Okay.
I did notice also that we have an incorrect email for Diane. I think it's bouncing back, so we should make that correction before we send out another invitation. Forgot about that, sorry.
Okay, did we lose Leah? And it looks like we lost Leah, Rhonda, and Robin. Okay. Our goal here is all of the groups have been asked in this intersession to respond to 3 questions and to present those 3 questions, the results of those questions back to the group. Oh, I see what you're doing. Okay. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to take each of the questions. We'll have, I think, 20 minutes for the first. We may try to make that go faster if we can. 20 minutes for the second question. Then we're going to take 5-minute break so that each of us can think about the recommendations that we would want to make, which is the answer to question number 3. So there'll be a 5-minute break to think about that. Then we will come back together, come up with what we think are 3 to 5 initial achievable, actionable recommendations. I'm trying to see, I don't have the agenda in front of me anymore here. So Amanda, maybe you can help me. We'll come back for about 35 minutes to talk through those, and then we'll have 5 minutes to prioritize. Claire and Amanda, did I get that right?
You did, with the qualification that we might have to shorten some of these discussions since we've
had technical difficulties.
We did.
Okay, so let's start with the first question. And now I've lost the first question here.
Eric, I'm going to pull it up on the Google Doc, and just so,
Okay.
if you don't mind, just a quick second here for, can everyone see the Google Doc? I just want to make sure we're good there.
Yeah, I have the Google Doc up on a separate screen. If people can do that, that probably will make the most sense.
Okay, and I sent out the link as well. The idea of this is just so that way we can take notes as people are talking. Kind of use this as like a whiteboard situation. So if there's things that you want up here and you want to make sure that we're capturing, please shout them out to me. So that way when we get down to the last question, we can, have time to review what was discussed.
Okay. So let's start with the first question, which is from your work group's perspective. So this is from the perspective of neighborhood and physical environment. Okay, what is the root cause that is maintaining the status quo or inhibiting systemic change efforts for the within the context of the Thompson scenario? Now, let me just mention one other thing before we go any further. In the email, you'll notice that we've incorporated 4 themes or 4 filters that we want to apply to our work. One is we want our recommendations to be significant. In other words, not just nibbling around the edges, something that's important. We want it, the recommendations should incorporate interoperability and data sharing across silos and organizations. They should be able to be started immediately and be achievable in a reasonable period of time, and they should further social and racial justice. So as you're thinking about recommendations that we're getting to in question 3, these are the 4 factors that all of the groups are going to be applying. Okay, so significant, interoperability, start immediately, achieve in a reasonable period of time, further social and racial justice. All right, so let's go back to the question. What comments do we have on root causes that are maintaining the status quo or inhibiting systemic change efforts? Please go ahead and jump in.
I was going to talk a little bit, from my perspective about the lack of affordable housing that is pretty much everywhere we all work, I'm sure. A lot of the root causes to that, I would say several of the top root causes are zoning, local zoning as a prohibitor, lack of funding to support sort of production or, rental assistance operating costs, all of which we have but don't have enough of, and residential segregation, which I think of all 3 is the most difficult. And it is both the result and the cause. It's a little bit of a chicken and the egg because we're stuck with it right now. I don't think stuck with it's the wrong word. We have it. So it is both a cause and has been caused by the problem. Make sense?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Does anyone else have anything that they want to add to that or that they have as additional root causes? Sarah, are you speaking?
No, I'm thinking about whether to speak. I guess, so I think this is kind of meta, but I think one of the root causes from a structural perspective is our macroeconomic policy in the US.
Can you define that a little bit more specifically?
The US version of capitalism as engendered through economic and social policy.
Well, and maybe actually, I don't know, maybe I can be sort of a little bit less than a little lower meta, something I was going to say, which is treating property as a commodity rather than as, for example, utility, unnecessary utility, which we do with other things as well, like healthcare. But I would say that's a little sub meta or whatever phrase you'd be. But so I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, and so if policy and macroeconomic structure is up here, we see that engendered through things like lack of living wage, the wealth gap, current taxation structure, current social policy. So I'm sorry, it's like it's very large, but if it's root causes, I'm going all the way up there.
Okay. And Kaylee has put something in the chat. I just want to make sure that Amanda captures that. You can, if you wish, instead of writing to the chat, you can write directly onto the Google Doc.
And that would actually be more helpful than the chat if you would do that. So that way, because I'm going to copy and paste what was in the chat.
Yeah, so
We get it here.
yeah, feel free to just type directly into the document. All right, other comments, other root causes that you want to talk about?
Well, I'll offer up transportation comes up again and again, and not having a, perhaps the root cause is lack of a reasonable public transportation system.
Okay. And remember, while we're talking a lot about housing and now we've added transportation, there are other issues that we want to talk about. So for example, food. Do we want to say anything about food?
Well, I mean, it's hard. So from an agricultural policy perspective, this part kind of nested in my original statement, right? So we're a commodity agriculture nation as opposed to a local ecology and food culture nation, right? So we see that playing out across the spectrum in the literature from the USDA and the literature from like individuals such as Adam Dronowski. Diane, if she's on the phone, she's excellent at talking about the intersection of agriculture and food insecurity and food systems and community food systems and food justice. So, yes.
Well, what would let's try to get more in there. You said food justice, community food systems. Diane, do you want to add something to that?
Hi, everyone. Sure. Sorry I'm not joining by camera. I'm a little under the weather today, and I'm in fact waiting to have a COVID test.
Oh, no.
Yeah. But yeah, there's so much to unpack there in that space. And I think, you know, from my perspective, I think there's a lot of confusion. There's so much between the farmer and our tables. And there's a lot of profit that happens in that space. And, you know, food companies are very clever about how to convince us, or about convincing us if we spend a little bit more on our money, and a little bit more on our food, it's going to mean that it's a better product for our family. And that's not necessarily always true. And so, you know, I think about how that really devalues the purchasing power of the SNAP dollar. And just sort of different ways that we can get at that. So again, I know it's complicated. It really does take engaging the world of agriculture in ways that perhaps we've never thought of. You know, here in the small state of Massachusetts, we import 90% of the food that we consume. And as a result, we have the most expensive food in the country. And we've really got to look at what that means in terms of, you know, when mom is juggling between paying the rent, keeping the lights on, turning the heat on when it gets cold, and feeding her children, really what that means. You know, when you can't make a SNAP dollar stretch. And in the broader context, understanding that we have probably the most abundant food system in the world, that, you know, comparatively is the least expensive and the most efficient. So it's, you know, it's complicated, but there's a lot of food shaming that happens, you know, this whole buy organic, buy cage free, buy non-GMO. And if you sit and you know, really dig into, you know, the values and the trade-offs that people have to make. So I'll pause there. But that's, you know, I appreciate, it's such a deep conversation that, you know, more nutritionists need to be engaged in, doctors, that the health professionals need to be talking about the cost of food. So thank you.
Do we want to say anything about specifically about availability of food, food deserts, things of that sort?
So just from one of the ways we're trying to talk about food access right now is to actually determine, there's a term called food apartheid. So when we're talking about food deserts, we actually are not saying that. I mean, this is the way we're framing it now is food apartheid, because there's a regional kind of a structural influence in there. And yes, absolutely. And that kind of all goes back to commodification, right? So if you have healthy local agricultural systems, then you're not as dependent upon, you know, the mini mart on the corner. But yes, we definitely would want to talk about food apartheid and food distribution within the root causes perspective.
I am going to be turning off my video because I'm losing internet connectivity here. So not that I'm not here, I'm just not going to be photoed.
Hey, Sarah, could you say, what was it, food apart? Can you spell that for me or drop it in the chat for me?
It's food apartheid, and Kaylee's talking about there actually is true. There's a whole movement talking about the envisioning of food deserts as a concept, but kind of where we are right now and the common reframing is the term food apartheid.
I'd like to offer just a small comment in response to Diane and actually to Sarah as well, that part of what I struggled with this question was the sphere of impact from which we are all speaking. So versus like the scale for which we can imagine. So I think that we're talking about macro political economic structures which inhibit systemic changes, but our community of care, our community of influence is at a much different scale. And so how do we balance being abolition minded and, you know, abolition theory minded while being mutual aid based and community based in our actual changes? And so I struggled with this because my answer is always racial capitalism is the primary driver of continued inequalities, and that the answer to that is potentially community autonomy, which is what Diane is saying about food, right? Communities are not autonomous when it comes to their care. There's so much in between them and their basic needs. And coming from a university, I just feel like if we want to be interoperable in real life, right, incorporate all of these silos, universities are a great place to start because they have lots of resources that they could potentially distribute to the community at large if we changed the way that we viewed them. So I guess I'm just excited to both talk about what the macro problem is, but also like what our micro impact might be, and maybe talking about those two things separately so that we can create solutions together.
Okay, that's really important, I think. And I have to admit, I forgot the other two questions. So we're talking about root causes here, right? And so that's definitely where my brain telescoped to, because I think of the root, I go all the way there. But so what are the other two questions? So what kind of, okay, they're brief. So we have what kinds of information? Oh, yeah. Okay, then we have actual recommendations. Got it. Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
But right now we're just focused on the first question, just looking at the root causes.
I wanted to give space for the fact that Kaylee anticipated the need to do question number 3 already.
All right. Do we have anything more that we want to add at this point, or do we want to move on to the second question?
Eric, this is Dee Dee. I'd like to add something.
Please.
In my community, we call it the pause factor, that we have to maybe sometimes pause to make sure all voices are heard. But I would just like to say, as I'm not an academic, I've been a direct service provider for 40 years. So I don't have the language or maybe the root causes that other people have. But I was a little taken back by the scenario itself and the amount of what I would consider stereotypes that were in there. And that I don't think any cultural or, because we serve almost exclusively the Native American community, that trying to navigate across all those systems without a navigator, with all those systems not having a cultural or racial understanding of the community, you know, not only are they going to one place that might not understand their perspective, but they're trying to navigate across systems that don't understand their perspective. So I'm going to just go back to, again, that complication of navigation where there's not an understanding, a true on the ground understanding of the needs of the community in terms of their cultural community, cultural and racial community.
Thank you, Dee Dee. I appreciate that. All right. Do we have anything more? Any other, anything that we think needs to be added to this root cause discussion? You're thinking, remember that we're thinking about transportation, housing, food and nutrition, recreation, transportation, all of those areas. Is there anything else that you feel that we have not captured in terms of root cause that we should add to this list?
Hi, everyone. Diane here. I just want to lift out something that I did write in the chat there, that historically, you know, those, as Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley says, those closest to the pain have historically been furthest from the power. Having, you know, I guess sort of what I'm trying to draw out is sort of the personal shame that is often associated with poverty, and needing to flip that to understand that the system is broken. However, the system is not, because it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. And that's keeping certain populations subjected to the control and power of others. You know, I was in a meeting, I spoke on a panel at a summit this week, Hunger to Health, the Hunger to Healthy Collaborative here in the greater Boston area. And there was a gentleman who's a professor from Tufts University, which, you know, is in my neighborhood and actually directly impacts the cost of housing here in my neighborhood as it quickly gentrifies. And, you know, his objective is to make unhealthy food ridiculously expensive, right? Like, this is how we'll get at getting low-income people healthy, right? We'll just make unhealthy foods out of reach. And I wonder if he's ever had a conversation with somebody who's with the lived experience of hunger, because I can argue many reasons why that's the wrong approach. And so I just, again, when I think about how we engage people, how we invite them into the room, how we share our power, how we share this space is so critically important. And it requires the technical assistance of people like me, who can go in and, you know, to the best of my ability, disinfect a room of the power structures that have existed now for decades. And yet we're no closer to the solution. So I come with this, to me, seems very natural. To others, it feels uncomfortable. When I talk about what that power sharing looks like and should feel like to somebody like me in a room like this, that's being replicated over and over and over and over again every single day. So I think that really is at the core. I think if we're ever going to have the impact that I know that we're all here to do, we will never get there, and we will have failed if we don't seize the opportunity and learn how to engage people like myself. Because we are, you know, we're so often spoken of as poor. And I hate that term, because we are rich in so many things. But yet we're overlooked simply because we step into a space and, you know, it's poverty, but oftentimes, and we know this, it's race, Black women, particularly women of color, being historically disproportionately impacted. How are we inviting women of color into our space? We've got to look at that.
All right, Diane, thank you for that. And we are out of time, so I want to move on to the second question. If you do think of something while we're talking about the second question and you want to move back up there, you are certainly welcome to input whatever you'd like onto the Google Doc, and we can add that in. So the second question was, what kinds of information do other work groups possess? So that's the other 4 work groups that, if shared with our group, could identify and help resolve systemic issues like the one experienced by families represented in the Thompson scenario. Let's focus on that one for a few minutes, and then we can address the second part of that question, which is what kinds of information do we have in our group that could be valuable to others? So first, yes, Kaylee.
May I share a quick anecdote to start our discussion off for this question, if I may? I'm in Santa Cruz, California, and our high school, I think I shared this before, so stop me if you already know. One of our high schools, Watsonville, they completely defunded their school resource officer program. They removed their police from the schools, and they took that resource vacuum, which wasn't really a vacuum because they don't really do much for school safety in the first place, but they replaced that with social emotional counselors. And this really inspired me because we're talking ultimately about interoperable data sharing. And I think this is good because in this moment, right, all of us have this access to information from different silos. And in a moment where we're also nationally talking about defunding the police, we can use this as a model to say, there is information that we have, whether it is already biased. We can discuss that later because it is already biased, but we can take that information, for instance, out of the hands of juvenile justice and law enforcement as an example, and funnel that data back into a community, right? A community board, for instance, that now has access to all of that data. Because we know why we're hungry, but having that extra data would make community solutions. I don't know. I guess that anecdote kind of offers me hope as to how this data sharing model could be returned to the hands of the people whose data it is about them, right? And then we can use that to move resources around. There's also another school district that did this in Berkeley as well. So I think maybe we could be paying attention to how the information that is the data that is housed by those resource officers, where it goes and who can access it. Thank you.
So Kaylee, what specific information do you think that the other 4 work groups have that should be shared with our group?
I suppose what I'm talking about is more so we're all from maybe the public health or direct services arenas whose silos represent, whose data silos represent information about social problems that could be disseminated. And that's the complicated thing about the HIPAA of the sharing of information. Perhaps I'm not understanding the question. And well, I'm not
the question is, we've got 4 other work groups. We have one on economics, one on legal, one on healthcare and behavioral health, and one on community and social context. I think that's correct, right? So if you think about those 4 groups, economics, legal, healthcare, behavioral health, community, and social, what information do those groups have that, if shared with our group, would benefit people who are represented by the Thompsons? And anyone can jump in at this point.
This is Sarah. I'm just gonna pipe in a little bit. I'm a healthcare community activist hybrid. So I'm a clinician in the community group. So the initiative that I help run is about sharing information from community settings into clinical settings and vice versa to improve the achievement of the goals of the people we collectively care for. So, so from that perspective, if the use case is how can the community get information from the healthcare sector in order to improve the community as a whole, right? This is what things like community health needs assessments do, right? To help identify collectively what the barriers to collective health are. Whether it be lack of rural agriculture, or whether it be lack of mental behavioral health capacity, or whether it be lack of housing, right? So a community health needs assessment is essentially a collaboration between the group that we sit in, right, and the healthcare behavioral health group, with the goal of achieving population health and the collective health of the individuals that live there. So I'm not going to go further into that, but everything we create in the Gravity Project is about achieving that aim, right? Putting our community hat on, taking our clinical hat on, and making sure that we're trying to communicate the story of the people we care for.
So you're talking about things at the individual level would be like health risk assessments?
Yes, certainly health risk assessments. So everything from assessments to needs, right? So again, I always reference or try to reference the Gottlieb and Alderwick lexicon of social risks. So the social determinants are the community perspectives, like the drivers, not the macro, like I was talking about earlier, but really what the community is facing with some macro elements. And then social risk is the screening, right? So if I do a screening tool, identifying something for a patient, or a client or a community, and then the need is the thing that the individual represents and as their own concern. And this goes back to what Diane was saying, right? So I can screen and screen and screen as a clinician, but it's really about talking to the person and saying what is the most important thing for you, right? And no robust community health needs assessment would dismiss the actual primary voice of the community members that live there.
Okay, other thoughts on, information that could be shared by those other groups, economics, legal, healthcare, community? What the goal is to try to improve neighborhoods and physical environment. What other information would you like to have that the other groups might have?
So I think it's a little bit, listening to, starting with Kaylee, I think it's a hard question. If we take the question literally, I think it's a hard question because think about how broad our conversation is. We have no idea what's going on in those conversations. So if we take it literally, I don't feel like I could answer the question. But building on the frame that Sarah sort of set, if we think about it a little more specifically in the way she was, I know that there's, and some of you who work in Boston may be familiar with this, but the Boston Medical Center has been very concerned about social determinants of health, but specifically about people becoming, instability in housing and people becoming homeless. And so some of the clinicians have incorporated questions about people's, about, their situation. So their housing situation. You can get financial advice. You can do your taxes for free with somebody at some of the clinics. So I think that's kind of where, and there's an you don't expect in a healthcare setting for all of that information to be collected, but they've realized that's a critical touch point for those, that their patients are potentially they see a lot of patients who are at risk. They want to identify it and then be able to make referrals. So they've created, intentionally, they've put some foundation money up for, addressing what we call upstream, social determinants issues. They have a partnership with Metro Boston, whatever MBHP is called now, the housing agency, to do some, supports, interventions for families that are finding themselves being evicted. So it seems to me that is kind of the space Sarah was talking about. Otherwise, this question feels like hard to put my hands around and understand.
Let me
Oh, sorry.
let me just throw out another thought. Okay, we're thinking a lot about healthcare. What about thinking about the legal area for a minute? The Thompsons have had a variety of legal issues. What could be shared from the legal side that would help in dealing with housing and other physical environment issues?
Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat, Richard's not here, but he is from that Health Watch, Children's Health Watch and BMC. So just to address your comment, Eric, so in Massachusetts, we have, obviously housing's expensive, people get evicted, but we have some awesome legal interventions that they don't have in other states. We have an actual housing court system where if you're going to be evicted, you go in front of a judge who knows the housing law, not just a district court judge generally, which is not what happens in many other states. So that could potentially be, what are they doing about evictions over in the legal section? The other thing we have in Massachusetts, which I don't think they have most other places, is in the court, there's a social worker in each of the housing courts. So if there's somebody with a disability, in particular somebody with a psychiatric disability, although other disabilities, is up for eviction, the court says this person has additional rights under fair housing law, and this person may not be able to really manage or understand what's happening legally. We're going to give them kind of an extra step to talk to the social worker to see if we can keep them in housing. So that would be another example, of a model that the legal group could come. What is the legal group doing around evictions, I guess, is maybe the broader question.
And maybe we could broaden that out by talking about sharing information about evictions across other providers. So your behavioral health case manager may not know that you're being evicted. The two systems don't talk to each other.
Or the behavioral health manager might know that there is such a thing as a legal eviction. So for example, right now there's a CDC moratorium on evictions nationally. The National Housing Law Project has done this awesome job of creating a website where you can download a form that helps protect you, that complies with the CDC. And it's in, a whole bunch of different languages. And we've all tried to get that information across sectors so that wherever you're touching a person, if eviction's an issue, they know what their rights are.
I have a question. I feel like maybe I should know the answer to this, but the question is, what kinds of information would help our group? So who is our group specifically? Like, who are the specific actors that need information and that are going to do something with it? So I think I've heard that there are, maybe community organizing types, we're called the neighborhood, maybe there are neighborhood associations, maybe there are housing coalitions, as well as housing agencies. Am I on the right track? So I'm just trying to put myself into some character and imagine the data that I think would help me address the root causes.
Well, Claire, I think if we think about the function, I mean, what we're looking at is neighborhoods and physical environments. So defined as transportation, housing, food, all of those areas. There will be conceivably different practitioners that cover those areas. You might have a behavioral health case manager. You might have people who have responsibility for community action. There could be a variety of different people engaged. The question is, I think, what's being siloed that is adversely affecting people like the Thompsons' ability to get housing, to get transportation, to upgrade the neighborhood, things of that sort. What do the other groups know that stays in their silos?
I'm typing this, but one of the things, I have to go soon, which is really sad, but one of the things I think I just hope we think about when we think about data sharing is, so in Gravity, we're always thinking about the data we're making and the data we need to care, but also the data that we have that we need to protect from a data justice perspective. So I think both of those lenses are really important when we're thinking about interoperability. Like what is the data that I don't want the legal system or judicial system to have, right? And even when we think about legal system, of course, it's everything from like ICE to like, the local housing court. So there's a lot in there, and there's different, depending on the use case and depending on like the end game, there's a lot of different perspectives I would take on that data, depending on the individual I'm caring about. So just putting on and taking off the different hats of like sensitivity and risk, right? And from a harm reduction perspective, when it comes to data, I just hope that we can think about that throughout our conversations on data sharing.
Yeah, this is Jennifer Lopez at UCLA. I really appreciate that. I came on late, but I feel like the question has been restated a couple of ways, so I feel comfortable answering, but if I'm out of touch, it's because I wasn't in the whole conversation. But one is, I'm working with a lot of Native American communities who are very reticent about some of these screenings, like the ACEs one, scoring high in that. They correlate that with the loss of their children based upon historically what has happened to them. And then separately, you're saying I'm putting on and off the hats. Before you spoke up, I was just going to add that for me, the environment means the built environment. And most of the data I do usually focuses on community-based participatory research. Like those people who are most affected are part of collecting the data because they often have solutions in mind. So things of whether it's photo voice that has been turned into like multimedia voice or video voice mapping, walkability assessments, which is a fancy way of having communities map out, where they want to have safe places to play multi-generationally, what they're up against, graphic facilitation. So I'm happy to join future calls and share examples of that. But it is really powerful when cities, for example, can see that that offering of the data that is created by those most affected, and when it gets matched with a lot of larger data that we have access to, so you can see it's just not an anomaly. And at least one county that usually doesn't get much funding, got the highest funding ever because of this really innovative partnership with these families who are usually not at the table. Thank you.
Dee Dee, I'd like you to talk about just relate our conversation about VI SPDAT. When you talk about information, VI SPDAT can determine whether or not somebody gets a house or not, or gets housed.
Yeah.
Share with the group, if you would, what you shared with me.
So in Maricopa County, Native Americans make up about 2% of the county population, about 10% of the homeless population. So fair housing has not been working for Black and Brown communities. And so we've been looking at ways in which, and particularly in serving the chronic homeless, ways in which Black and Brown communities, I'll speak for the Native community, are not entering our coordinated entry system for homeless housing and all those systems of care. And the data tool that they use is the VI SPDAT. And many of the tribal communities across the nation that are working on urban Indian housing have moved away from what they call housing first to stories first, and using a tool about letting the person tell their story that will capture the true need for the type of housing that they need, rather than a VI SPDAT, which is a tool that is not capturing, and we're finding that, in particularly the African-American community, is routed to rapid rehousing. And then at the end of rapid rehousing being unsuccessful because they don't have the job and the economic wherewithal when the rapid rehousing voucher expires, when they really would have probably been, placed in permanent supportive housing, where they would have had a housing voucher and had the right level of housing that they needed to be successful. So we're really trying to look at, and I'll just go back to, and I appreciate the other person's response about data tools for the Native American community, is the most data tools across the board, cross disciplines, were not designed, or and Native people come from practice-based tools that they've used over the years that have worked for them, rather than a best practice tool that's been a national best practice. And so I think when you go into tribal communities, you're not the expert anymore. They're the subject matter experts, and learning about what tools have worked for them and what has worked and the models that are working for them. And so we're trying to move to a different tool here in Arizona, and particularly here in Maricopa County. But really, if we went, my feeling is we've been doing stories first all along, because when we engage the Native population into our housing, we have about 1,000 units of housing, is we're listening to their story first. And then by listening to their story and them tell us, their story, we're able then to determine the right level of housing option that they need. So anyway, I think I captured our conversation, Eric.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. But that's just such a common tool being used nationally for housing, and I wanted to make sure that we got that point taken. In the interest of time, I'm going to move to our 5-minute break for people to think about recommendations that they want to bring forward. During this 5 minutes that we're going to take right now, you are welcome to either add to what's in the Google Doc on the previous 2 questions, or begin writing down your ideas of recommendations. Again, I would just remind you to go back to the 4 filters or parameters that we set: significance, interoperability, trying to remember all 4 of them. Amanda, maybe you can help me. Ability to start now,
start immediately.
timeliness, be able to complete in a reasonable period of time, and furthering racial and social equities.
Yeah,
so try to think of those 4.
I pulled it up. Can you see it or no? Or do you just still see the Google Doc?
I see the Google Doc.
Okay, it's not swapping screens for me. I pulled up the 4 points, but you already covered them.
Okay, so let's take a couple of minutes. Feel free to, stay on the line, update the Google document, go down and add to recommendations. It's under item number 4. Just go ahead and type in things that you think should be recommendations. I just asked that the recommendations meet those 4 parameters.
Okay, great. And this is Jennifer again. I know I was late to come on, but then I also have to drop off, but I'll definitely add my suggestions to the link and look forward to the next meeting.
All right, thank you. Claire, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, the point is for all of us to do some individual thinking and reflecting, and then when we come back together, we'll see if we have some common themes among our individual thoughts. I don't know how much time we'll have to truly prioritize then and get them down to 3 to 5. Maybe that's something we'll see how it goes. Stop.
Okay, if you have ideas, please put them down as soon as possible. We're going to have maybe another minute or two before we come back together again and start talking about what we've come up with. All right, I think we're going to need to come back together again. We've got about 20 minutes left. And I'd like to have us talk about, again, achievable, actionable recommendations. So let's take a look at what we have. If you put something in there that isn't an actionable recommendation, my request would be, can you change it into something that is actionable?
I'm wondering too if some folks didn't type directly into the Google and wanted to offer their recommendations in another way.
That's a very good point. So if you have something that you'd like to add, just let's go ahead and talk. And that can be something new, or it can be a proposed revision to something that's up there.
Hi, all. This is Diane. Of course, when I think about, engaging people with lived experience, trying to put, sort of capture that here, it just really wasn't working for me. But I do appreciate, I see that somebody wrote community voices and stories are collected to add understanding and interpretation to community data. The idea of story collecting and others sharing others' stories, I think we need to sort of rip that open and think about, again, I question whether or not it belongs here because I think this is a long-term strategy. But how do we pass the mic so that folks are able to share their own narratives so that they don't come through our lenses? So we're not necessarily picking and choosing whose story we're going to share. So I guess I just wanted to sort of add that caveat.
Thank you, Diane. But again, I would ask you, as you think about this question, okay, please think about, there are four major areas that we're being asked to provide actionable recommendations in: housing, food, transportation, recreation. What could be done? Kaylee?
Sorry, would you be able to help me understand what actionable means in this context?
Sure, it means that you can actually do something, that within a reasonable period of time, you could actually achieve a result.
Mm-hmm. So is the suggestion to, for instance, form community data trusts like I wrote down below, would that be considered actionable, as well as like defunding police, for instance? Is that considered actionable, or is it too broad?
Well, first of all, I'd suggest that you put in whatever you like. Then we can always work with it, okay? But I would suggest that you really want to focus on the four areas that we're being asked for recommendations in: housing, food, transportation, recreation. I'd like to see us at least try to address recommendations that have an impact in one of those four areas.
I was on a planning call the other day where we talked a lot about what is the goal of this work. And it is about data and interoperability. And we talked about how, you can't really separate that from your policy recommendations or your intervention recommendations. And so the thought is, if defunding the police might be the larger recommendation you're making, but tying that to, does that have a tie to data and interoperability? And if so, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, Kaylee, remember our four criteria are, and I think this is where Claire's going, correct me if I'm wrong. We need to address, we need to meet the four filters, the four parameters: interoperability, timeliness, furthering social equities, and being significant. So how would interoperability, for example, be impacted by defunding the police?
Or what if the defunding the police is the goal? What are the data that we need in order to achieve the goal? I mean, I think ultimately this work group's trying to make recommendations in relation to data.
Thank you. And I will just make a quick comment and then I'm going to step back because I think that my lack of expertise is coming through here, but
not at all. This conversation that I have had on a number of times with a lot of people.
Thank you. I think one of the specific examples I think of when I think of what data has to do with defunding the police, for instance, would be instead of, well, the police collect data on the race and demographic categories, for instance, on people who commit crimes. And what if that data, let's say it's ACEs screening is a problematic thing, but let's say that data, instead of used for predictive modeling for how to police communities, was instead used for predictive modeling for who will need services. It's mostly about taking the data that already exists, sharing it with different people and doing different things with it than it is necessarily about something that like a specific scenario that I thought through that would be more robust here. But I'm going to continue thinking about this. I'm actually still in the process of researching how interoperable data can be targeted towards the reduction of adverse childhood experiences in a way that is disarticulated from punitive institutions like juvenile justice. So thank you for letting me speak.
All right, do we have some other suggestions that relate to that? Do we have other recommendations for housing, food, transportation, recreation, and as Claire pointed out, that do tie back to interoperability?
Hi, this is Dee Dee. I was just thinking about transportation because we haven't talked a whole lot about it. I'm just thinking we might want to say something about transportation in terms of the impact of COVID on more rural communities. I mean, it's tied into the lack of the digital divide as well. But we're actually finding that we are able to communicate, particularly in the healthcare and behavioral health field, better, easier when the digital divide technology is there. And we're in the Native and Community Indian Health Service. We're really looking forward to expanding telehealth and telecommunications in terms of reaching some communities that were very isolated, where you might not have providers. And so transportation was always such a huge barrier, but if you solve digital divide issues, could we improve some of those transportation barriers going forward from what we've learned from, one of the maybe few things that's positive about COVID? It's just a thought. And then for us here in more urban areas, we have 120,000 Native people living in the Phoenix metropolitan area. So we have more Native people than most tribal communities have right here in Phoenix. And if they don't have a car, in terms of the relationship between housing and transportation, HUD has, it's about a $10,000 transportation index that HUD has determined. If you don't have a car, that's more disposable income that you can pay rent or insurance or take care of your kids. And so, urban transportation is very different in terms of clean energy and most of our housing we've built along the light rail, so people don't have to have a car, and they don't, and it's and it's, environmentally friendly as well. So those were just kind of couple thoughts that I was thinking about transportation. I
So
don't know if
Dee,
that's helpful or
if we
not.
take a look at what you've just talked about in terms of transportation, how could data interoperability impact transportation? What kind of recommendations could you make that would have an impact on transportation?
Wow. I don't know. I'm just thinking, one of the significant concerns, at one point Navajo Nation had 25% COVID positive rates, highest in the country and maybe the world. And transportation, lack of roads, lack of paved roads. There's only about 30% of the roads in Navajo Nation that are even paved. So there are a lot of things. There was, overcrowded housing, intergenerational housing, not a place to isolate because of the overcrowdedness, the lack of roads, lack of infrastructure in terms of food. The trading post had no fresh foods whatsoever and very little cleaning supplies or anything like that. So transportation became an issue, and the digital divide, so everything that you could think of, Navajo Nation was ripe for having that 25% COVID positive rate because of all that lack of infrastructure. And I am not the right person to connect it to the data interoperability. I'm not the right person for that, but you can't, but the digital divide is equally, severe and significant there too. So it's, however, I think moving forward, I think trying to improve healthcare outcomes using technology is not going to go away, particularly for isolated and more rural communities where they don't have providers.
Other thoughts?
Hi, this is Lorene Nelson. I haven't joined the call late, so I didn't get a chance to introduce myself to the group. I'm an epidemiologist and statistician at Stanford University and faculty director of the Center for Population Health Sciences here. And I have a proposal that I guess you could scroll down and see it. So as I talk, I don't want to take up too much time, but it starts with Lorene Nelson's suggestions or something. It's on the Google Doc. There we go. Thank you. So, so I've been working on a number of initiatives that have a lot to do with data interoperability as well as, and connecting that with neighborhood level sort of information and actions that can improve neighborhood health. So I have funding from the Google Cloud. They are building a huge data platform for us here at Stanford for all 58 counties in California with rich social determinants of health and other environmental factors down to the census tract level. And we're making it available to the public health officers that are managing the pandemic. So those kinds of data resources are great. The other thing that I've worked on and that I put here as the first recommendation, and these are things that could enable progress in any of the 4 areas, but I think we need to, especially with COVID and in the future, move to more rapid data collection methods, possibly mixed methods. So I just put in a grant with Lisa Goldman-Rosas, who's our Director of Community Engagement, to use sort of a combination of quantitative survey methods and then focus groups and structured interviews with select people to identify the factors that are barriers and facilitators of access to COVID testing in the Santa Clara County. So developing those methods and using them. There's also excellent methodology developed by Dr. Abby King, who's on our faculty. She's a health psychologist. She's used this all over the world, and it's called Our Voice, and it's a way of enabling people in neighborhoods to collect information about their their lived experiences in their own neighborhoods. They can tape themselves, they can video, they can, and what they do, it's a whole system where they can document their own sort of neighborhood and built environment and the factors that enhance and detract from their health. And then they use that on their own to approach their community leaders to advocate for change. So this has been it's been an international award-winning tool. And I know that Dr. King is very keen to enable it to be used in circumstances like this. So I can connect you there. The last thing is that the theme that I hear all of you saying is that it's very important for the storytelling component, that people with lived experiences be able to describe those and tell stories about them. And so I put a link here for Hillcrest Communications, where there's an excellent communications specialist that specializes in how you can combine sort of data for impact along with storytelling to really make impactful progress on impressing upon people the importance of listening to the individual voices. So I just put those out there as sort of generic but very specific things that can be done or are being done actually here at Stanford as a possibility and could be used for any of the 4 areas.
So Lorraine, you put some excellent thoughts there. I'm wondering, is it possible for you to reframe some of that into an actionable recommendation? What would your actionable recommendation be, taking those suggestions?
Sure, I'll go ahead and do that right now on the document. Sorry.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So we are down to the last couple of minutes, and I want to be respectful of people's time. Claire, I'm going to ask for your thoughts in terms of how do we want to proceed. Certainly one way we could go is that we could try to take what we have here as these answers and put them out on the hub and ask that each of our members comment on the hub in terms of which of those recommendations would they want to prioritize, or would they want to revise the recommendation in some way. I'm thinking that, while it's not my preference to do this asynchronously, it may be the best way for us to proceed between now and our next session, where we will have another opportunity to review all of these recommendations. What are your thoughts, Claire?
Let me just ask Adam a question. What happens next with the recommendations? And I mean, I'm sensitive that we've asked people for a lot of time already. And I mean, we definitely need to get these fleshed out. There are some common themes. We probably need to sort of wordsmith them and then prioritize them.
So
Adam,
since we have so little time, I'll jump in real quick.
Thank you.
The answer is that these are meant to be sort of very preliminary. We're all talking off the top of our heads based on our own experience. The next step is going to be to take these to the next sort of all member, NAA meeting, which is what, in a week or so, in about a week. And to bring them together. What did other groups say? Where did they converge? Where are areas that just don't make sense for us, etc. This is early in the game. So, and then after we have those discussions, we have what we call a group of senior synthesis advisors, and we will bring, who will bring all of this together to actually try to see what makes sense, what's really plausible, what's pie in the sky, what brings in the most groups, it just synthesize, see what we have here, because we have 6 groups. Just a quick correction, Eric, 6 groups.
Oh, sorry.
We have 6 groups. That's all right. And we need to keep sort of whittling down. And as we learn from each other, I think it's, for example, I think it's entirely possible we'll come up with a recommendation that is a synthesis of something that, legal group and healthcare group and your group all said some similar version of, but needs to be altered in order to make it a reality. I'm making that up. This is the early fodder for subsequent discussions. Honestly, we would have been okay with just sort of talking things through and getting to recommendations later in the game. But almost every group said, "Could we get to recommendations?" So fair enough, and people do have good ideas. So that's the process. It's going to be iterative. We're going to bring it to the next full meeting. We're going to synthesize them across the 6 groups, and go from there.
Well, then my suggestion, Adam, and please give us your input on this, okay, would be that Amanda, Claire, and I take these recommendations that are here, just try to massage them to get them into the format of recommendations.
Absolutely,
And
and
then
sort of
put
with
those
the
up on
thought of
hub,
what's really possible.
and then have people take a look at that on the hub
Yep.
between now and a week from tomorrow when we have our meeting. Does that
I
make
think that's
sense,
great.
Claire,
Makes
Adam?
lots of sense.
Yeah, I mean, let's put these full notes there too. I would,
Sure.
as folks
Absolutely.
take a look, I'd want someone to check and make sure that we haven't lost something critical, or, you know, just maybe put in a comment saying, this is really important. I really endorse this, just
Yep.
to make sure that, you know, that process doesn't lose the wisdom of this room.
I think that
Exactly
makes
what
a
I
lot
was
of
going to
sense.
say. I don't want people to focus so narrowly on recommendations that we lose insights, that we lose, you know, important conversation that should inform other people, but that isn't necessarily about a recommendation. So I couldn't agree more.
All right, so Amanda, maybe if you could take a first shot at this and then email Claire and I, we'll try to reach a consensus between the 3 of us and try to get it out on the hub as quickly as possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that works. I do have one question too, because, you know, not everyone was able to attend this meeting. Do we want to, you know, send, you know, back out this Google Doc to everyone, and especially for those who weren't able to make it, to type in anything that they maybe want to share that they weren't able to today because, you know, they weren't able to make it? Do we want to provide that time to them as well?
Sure. I mean, I think that makes sense. I think once the 3 of us agree on something that makes sense, we can put it out on the hub as well as email it to all of the members, and have a note in the email that goes out that says, if you would like to comment, propose revisions, propose additions, this is also out on the hub, and that's a place where you can do it and share it with the entire group. All right.
My only 2 cents real quick is put a deadline on it, because otherwise.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so let's do that. And I want to thank everyone for their participation. And again, as Adam has pointed out, this is very preliminary. We still have lots more to do, but this can at least maybe give us a start into the process. Put something, I always find it easier to change things that are on the whiteboard rather than put things from scratch there. So hopefully we'll have a basis to get started. Does anyone ever have any other questions or comments that they want to make at this point? Claire, let me start with you.
Well, I want to thank you for your facilitation and thank everybody for their participation, and Adam and Amanda, your support is great. So just add to the thanks.
Well, thank you all for your participation, and we will be back in touch soon. The next time we'll meet on Zoom will be in the meeting on the 16th. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.